Um, we're going to start from the longer I learn. By the way, just reviewing what the Yerushalmi is, and obviously as I mentioned yesterday, when they printed the Talmud Bavli from the 1500s and on, there were many different editions. There's a Warsaw edition. We're familiar with the Vilna edition, and then the Zhytomyr edition. Each edition included Shekalim Yerushalmi in there. In their printing of if you bought a shas at that time, or you could afford to buy a shas at that time, it had the Shekalim in there. Oddly enough, that's why, as I mentioned yesterday, it depends what edition of shas you have at home. That's how big Masech Shekalim is. Sometimes it's 13 blot, sometimes it's 30 blot in one version of the Talmud. But I said to somebody in a joke that the reason why they put Yerushalmi in Shekalim in Bavli is to teach somebody from Jerusalem who's in need of Shekalim, who's in need of money, he should come to the Bavlim. He should come to Chutz La'aretz to collect. That's a joke, but it's a cute. But what's interesting is, as I told you yesterday, that the Mefarish of the Korban Eda was written by Rabbi Frankel, who not only wrote the Korban Eda, but there's another parish he wrote, which is not printed. I don't have it here. Is like he wrote a Rashi and a Tosfos on Yerushalmi. There was nothing on Yerushalmi, no Rashi and no Tosfos. So he took it on himself to write both. A nice, simple parish Rashi, and which we have on the side here, the Korban Eda, and another parish, I forgot, the Priya Eda, which is the Tosfos. Now, he, as I mentioned to you yesterday, was the rabbi. He had a student of Moses Mendelssohn, which is the founder of the Enlightenment movement. But the other parish is Rav Yisrael of Shklov. He is the Talmud of the Gra. He is the known writer of whatever the Vilna Gaon said. He didn't write too much. He wrote. He put it all together and edited the Svarim of the Gra. What's fascinating is two things. The first thing fascinating about him is you would think he was a Talmud since the Gra was a young man. He only became a Talmud to the Gra for 6 months, and then the Gra passed away. And yet he was the student that took over. You have such a similar idea in the Hasidic movement, where the Baal Shem Tov had many Talmidim, but they told us the one that the Maggid of Mezerich only met the Baal Shem Tov for a little bit, a few months, and he became the next leader. So sometimes a Talmud is only noticed at the end of the person's life. The other thing is, as you know the Gra Shul in the Rechavia, some of the Talmidim of the Gra came to Eretz Yisrael, and he was one of those leaders, Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov. And he had to come back to Lithuania to collect money for the Yishuv, but he ended up in Tzfas and then Jerusalem. But he had such a tragic life that all his 4 children and wife died in a plague in Jerusalem. Yet he still had time to write this pirish on Yerushalmi, Tiklin Chadatim, which is a Rashi also, but sometimes he disagrees with the Korban Eda. So it's fascinating, these people, when you see them written on the side, you think they had a computer and a relaxed life to be able to put this together. They had a very troubled life, and yet they wrote beautifully. Okay, so we're going to go quickly. We talked about yesterday that what's the main thing, Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni? We're on the base on the Sheni, 2 lines from the bottom. We talked about Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni. We said the main thing is Adar Sheni. Purim is an Adar Sheni, and Shushan Purim is an Adar Sheni. Aval Inyan Shtaros, when it comes to writing a document, Koisvin Adar Rishon, you write, this seems that the main Adar is Adar Sheni. So therefore, if you're writing a document, if it's Adar Rishon, you have to write out Adar Rishon. Today is, let's say, the 15th day of Adar Rishon. If it's an Adar Sheni, you don't have to write it. You write Stam, anonymously. In other words, you write Adar, and we can understood that it's Adar Sheni. The default is Adar Sheni. But if it's Adar Rishon, you should write Adar Rishon when you're writing a document. But Rabbi Yossi disagrees. And Rabbi Yossi holds that the default is Adar Rishon. If you're writing Adar Sheni, you have to write it out. And that's what we learned yesterday. It's not so clear if the halacha is, like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that the main one is Adar Sheni. because you see this opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, Adar Stam, Adar Rishon Stam. The default, when you're writing a document, if you don't want to write any descriptive, if it's Adar Rishon, just write Adar. But if it's Adar Sheni, then Tinyon. You have to write, today is the 2nd of Adar Sheni. So that's the way Rishalmi describes it. Next, we learned in our Mishnah that on the 15th day of Adar, they used to masaknes adrachim es rechoves v'smikves mayim v'oisim kol tzarchei rabim. They would fix the roads to prepare it for to get the roads ready for the oily regalim, and also fix the mikvahs. You know, the mikvahs, some of them became puzzle over the winter, and there are many people coming to oily regal. They're going to need good mikvahs, so they would fix them during that time. And v'oisim kol tzarchei rabim, all public works was done from they would start the work on the 15th day of Adar. There's a Mishnah in Masechtas Mayit Cotton that describes what is called a public work. Eli hein tzarchei rabim. What is called public work that is permitted to be done on Chol Hamoed. So done in Dinei Mamonos. You get rid of if there's a backlog of Dinei Mamonos. Let's say two people have a problem and a conflict regarding that money situation. You're allowed to do it even on Chol Hamoed. You have a dinei nefashos, or somebody has a capital punishment case. The court system is an operational. It's dinei makos. If somebody has a problem, you don't know if he's chayiv malchus or not. The courts would be in session. Even during Chol Hamoed, that's called tzarchei rabim, having a court in session. Unlike New York, where all the courts are closed for a lot of different things. Okay, but opoidim erochin v'charamim v'hegdeshes, and Bezdin decides questions of value and charamim and hegdesh. You know, if you need Bezdin to do the appraisal of something, they're open for that. Umashkin is a soita. And during Chol Hamoed, if there was a saita, you give her the water. There's no vacation for these people. B'sarfin is a par. If you need a para aduma, you would do a para baduma in Chol Hamoed. Or if an egla rufa, you would knock off an egla rufa. The rights in Eved Ivri. If an Eved Ivri wanted to stay by his master, needs to his ear drilled, the courts were open for that. Umataharin is a mitzora. And they would give tahara mitzora. And they would mitara tzora. They would uncover the lock. In other words, there was a lock over the pool of water that collected rainwater. Let's say they had a big cistern that collected rainwater for the public. So they would open up that lock so that people could start using the water on Chol Hamoed if they needed it. So you can't relock it, because basically you're opening it for the season, because the rainy season is over. And it's now time for people to benefit from the water that collected in that cistern. So basically, what we just went on a tangent is that you should know that although you personally not allowed to work on Chol Hamoed, the court system and the Kahanim system had to be open on Chol Hamoed. Tamon Tanina, we learned in the Masechta Moed Cotton, Mashkin Beis HaShalochin, that if it's a davar ha'ovid. Remember, if you're going to lose a lot of money, you're allowed to work on Chol Hamoed. So let's say a person has a field that you need to water it by hand. You're allowed to do that on Chol Hamoed. That's called Beis HaShalochin, is a field that you have to, it's an irrigated field. There's not enough rainwater, and therefore you have to water it. So then you're allowed to water those fields, because if you're not going to do it on Chol Hamoed, you're going to lose your crop. And then the Mishnah says, on Chol Hamoed, u'metzainin al kvaros. You could make markings, plaster marking over dead graves. You could remark them. So that you could do on Chol Hamoed Pesach. So the Gemara asks, what should be obvious? Didn't we learn that in Adar, in 15th day of Adar, they would remark the graves? So why did they have to remark it again? Comes Chol Hamoed Pesach. And says the Gemara, V'ti Paser, you can answer that Sheyoret Shetef Shel Geshamim V'shatfu. During the period of 15th of Adar, that Mishnah is talking about if a major rainstorm happened, let's say you had another snowstorm, and therefore it washed away the marking of the grave. So then on Chol Hamoed, you're allowed to remark it again. True, generally speaking, they mark the graves again come 15th of Adar. Apparently, throughout the winter, all the grave markings would wash away. But if there was another rainstorm after Adar, then they would remark it again on Chol Hamoed Pesach. Then the Mishnah says, the Yoitzin Af Al Klayim. The Mishnah said that in Chol Hamoed, they would send the Shluchei Bezdin, as I mentioned to you, that they used to have a task force that would inspect fields to see if the owners are planting Kalayim. And therefore, and if they saw that the owners are planting Kalayim, they would uproot those Kalayim for the owners. They would take it out. Now, the question is, that Mishnah in Moed Katan says that they would send Shluchim on Chol Hamoed Pesach. So the Gemara asked the same question. Didn't they already come out in Adar? Why did they have to re-go out again? And for the Gemara is simple. If Adar came out too early, so the task force can't do their job, because when they look at somebody's field, you can't really see if there's any growth there. Let's say the Adar came out in February, so it's too early. So therefore, going out in Adar was useless. So they had to go out again for the first time, Chol Hamoed Pesach. Now the Gemara asks a side question. Why did they have to, where do you see in the Chumash or in Tanakh that you have to mark a grave? The idea of marking a grave is pretty obvious, because you don't want Kahanim to step over a grave, or somebody who's tahar to step on the grave, not know he's tamei, and then he's going to be mitama something like truma or kachim. But still, where do you see in the Tanakh they marked graves? So minayin litziyun. How do you know where do you see in the Tanakh they marked the graves? Rab Brechia said like this. Rab Brechia said that Rab Yaakov bar Bas Yaakov, Rab Yaakov, the son of the daughter of Yaakov. Apparently, this Rab Yaakov's father was not such a good person, or maybe he was a goy. So that happens, that a goy married a Jewish, and their son became an Amora, written in the Talmud. So that's one of the cases. This Rab Yaakov, he's the son of the daughter of Yaakov. He said it over B'Shem Rab Chunya Divras Chavrim, in the name of Chunya from Divras Chavrin, a name of a place. And some say, Rab Yossi said, Amrullah, his version was, it wasn't Rab Yaakov bar Bas Yaakov, but it's Rab Yaakov bar Acha who said it B'Shem Rab Chunya Divras Chavrin. That was his version. And Rab Chizkiah, here's the third version of who said this following source, is Rab Uziel Brei, the Rab Chunya, the Bas Charvian, Rab Uziel, the son of Chunya Bas Charvian, who said the name of his father, B'Shem Rab Chunya Bas Charvian. So you have three sources of who said it, but the main source is this Rab Chunya Bas Charvian. And he said, the Torah tells you, the Tomei Yikra. By a Mitzorah, he should announce to everybody there's Tomei. It's almost as if every tumah should announce with its mouth, stay away. So just like by the Mitzorah had to announce to everybody that he's Tomei, even though he's outside the city, that's where he moved his location. He had to tell everybody, move away, I'm a Mitzorah. From here, you learn from the Tomei that every tumah has to have an announcement. Now, a grave can't talk, obviously. So the announcement of a grave is that you put a marking on a grave called a tziyun, and that tells everybody to stay away from that grave. Otherwise, you will become tamei. Now, then Rabbi Ila b'shem Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman gives an interesting thought, an interesting source. He has, my source is as you know, there's an Armageddon. There's a pasuk that talks about there's going to be a tremendous war, and there's going to be many dead people during that war. And the Tanakh tells us that the passerbys will see dead people on the ground. They'll see, like what you saw in the Holocaust, either a bone or a human being, and you're not going to have time to bury it. Just build over there next to it at Sion a marking to say that this was a human being is here, and when you get the time, then bury it. But in the meantime, make a marking that there's a dead person here. Etzem, so we darshan from this pasuk, Etzem, if you just have bones, if there's those bones there, and it has to be a lot of bones, a roiva kava bones, you make a marking to say that here we have bones, it's matama ba'oihel, and therefore stay away. Adam, if you have a dead person, if you just have the spine and the skull, even though it's the most of the body you don't have, you still make a marking over there, because as you know, just having a skull could be metama ba'oihel. Ubana, and you build, mishkan, you have to build it something permanent. You make sure the marking that you put should be a permanent stone that's set in the ground. Because if you're going to use a very shaky stone, what's going to happen is that, let's say, a good storm is going to happen and move the stone somewhere else, and people are going to think that the person's buried somewhere else. So that therefore, when you're making a marking, make sure to use an even kavua, a very steady stone that doesn't move with the wind. If you're going to use a shaky, a flimsy stone, it's going to move to another place and make everybody tameh in another place. You see the problem. If a person has the marking in the wrong place, and the guy sees the marking and accidentally stepped over that place, really he's tar, but he's going to think that he's tameh, and he's going to say, if I touch truma, I have to burn it. So you're going to have tar truma being burnt for no reason. Etzloi, you put it on top of the grave. It doesn't say. You put it etzloi, next to the grave. Limkoim tahara, next to the place, in a place of tahara. You don't put it on the tumah, on the body itself, but you put it a little at a distance so a person can see it from a distance and back off. Because if you put it on top of it, a person may not have time to stop and will be mitam himself. So you put it at a distance in a place of tahara. Tzion, from that pasuk you learn mekan litzion, that you have to put a grave marking. Now let's say, guy, we learned a little bit. Umatze even achas mitzuyenis, says the Yerushalmi, if you find one stone that has a marking on it, right? So if you put your hand over that stone, presumably you could assume that the guy put the stone not on top of the dead person, but at a distance away. But nevertheless, even though normal people don't do that, and therefore you should not be tameh, we go strict over here. Hamal oleo tameh. If you do put your hand on it, you become tameh, because we assume that this guy that put this marking, he made a mistake. And the oimer, I will say, meis mitsuya. There's a dead person underneath the marking, this monument. And he put it. This was on top. It was placed underneath it. In other words, he put the marking, the stone, right on top of the grave. If there were two stones, like one and then another stone, so then you could assume that there's one person buried in between the two stones. So therefore, hamal alain, if you put your hand and make a covering, or put your hand, let's say, over those stones, you're tar, because the stones are not on top of where the person was buried. But ubeinehem, but if you put your hand between the two stones, tameh, you're tameh, because you're right on top of the grave. But if there's some plowed dirt in between, then you could assume that there was nobody buried in between, and each stone represents a marking of somebody else. And therefore, we can, back to the same situation, we can assume that the guy put the stone right on top of the grave. So you have one body on one side, one body on the other side, and in Beneim tar, the in-between will be tar, usvivasem, around that body, around the in-between, which means by the two stones, tameh will be tameh. Then the Brisa says, Tani, we learned in the Brisa, ein mitzayinin al habasar. We don't put a matzeva on top of flesh. Let's say you have flesh, just the flesh, not bones, right? And the flesh is over there, kazayis basus betame ba'oil. So should you put a whole matzeva over there? No, you don't put it. Why? Because eventually, over time, in a couple of months, it's going to decay. Shemen is akel habasar. the meat is going to decay. So what happens if the meat is decay? Then the marking of the gravesite is a marking of nothing, because there's no the body, the flesh decayed. There's no bones. So if somebody puts his hand over it, he is tar. But he's going to think, because there's a grave marking over there, he's going to think that he's tamei, and therefore he's going to come to assume that he's tamei. And if he's going to touch truma, he's going to burn the truma for no reason. Rabbi Yustam ba'ashisham b'shunam boya kame Rabbana. Rabbi Yustam, the son of Shinam, asked in front of Ramana, the problem is, if you're not going to put a grave marking over there, somebody is actually going to become tamei and not know it. So you should put a marking over there. You should put a monument over there, because right before it decays, somebody's going to become tamei and not know it, and it's going to be tamei, something that should have been kept tahar. Amalei, but the long-term problem is worse. So Rabbana answered this Rabbi Yusta. He says, "Muti shiskalkul b'ilashah." It's better to things to go wrong just for a short period of time. By yiskalkulate, they shouldn't go wrong for a long period of time. Again, if you keep it there for a long period of time, a bigger problem will happen, because for many years people are going to think they're tamei when really they are not tamei. So ends this little sugya about how to construct a monument over a gravesite. I've seen two types of monuments. I've seen one monument like we all see, that the stone is straight up at a distance, not on top of the grave. But then you can have graves of tzaddikim, which have a stone just laid flat on over the tzaddik, over the person. I'm specifically thinking of the chief rabbi of New York, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, who's buried in Queens. If you go to his gravesite, everybody else around him has straight stones. His stone was laid flat on his grave. Okay, the Mishnah says, Am Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Bari Shaina in the beginning, Oikar Mashlichem Nechem, Vishrabu Oivre Aveira Mashlichem Ledrachim. In the beginning, the task force used to uproot the client that you had and threw it in front of you. So, but then there were plenty of people who purposely waited. They didn't want to uproot the client for themselves. They waited till the task force came and did it for them, and they benefited from it because the task force did it. So they used to throw the client into the field, and when people still were not careful about kalayim, they made a rule. It's very interesting that if they would find kalayim in your field in the month of Adar or something like that, you had time and you didn't remove it, your whole field becomes public property. That Bezdin has that power to do that. The Gemara explains. We learned in the Brayso. The task force job was, if they found kalayim, like the kashrus organization, they would uproot the kalayim. But the owners were happy for twofold. One, the one that the task force were doing the hard work of weeding out their fields. And then they used to benefit from this client, because when the task force weeded out the client, they would throw it on the field and the animals would eat it. But then there were plenty of people who came up to this idea, and they didn't remove the client themselves. They'd say, let the task force do it. So the task force, the police force, so to speak, the shomrim would take the client and walk to the public road and throw it there so that the owners can't benefit from it. The owners were still happy, because at the end of the day, they're doing the job. This task force is doing the job that you should have done of weeding out your field of kalayim. So finally, they made a takana that if the task force finds out that you have kalayim, they report you to the Bezdin, and the Bezdin will say, will confiscate your property, and it becomes public use. They will mafkir your entire field. So the Gemara says, how do you know that? What do you see in Tanakh that Bezdin, the court, the Jewish court, has a right to confiscate somebody's property? How do you know that? The Ksiv, we find in Tanakh, Ezra was trying to convince people to help him out, and he said, whoever's not going to come in 3 days, according to the advice, according to the agreement of the elders, all his property, all his possession will be deemed not his anymore, and he will be ostracized. So we see that hefker bezdin is hefker. Now, even if bezdin made your property a hefker, let's say they made somebody's property hefker. If a guy walks in and takes an apple off the tree, is he chayiv in meiser? Maybe how could they take away? That hefker is part of for meisers, that you don't have to give to Levi his share. How do you know that when bezdin makes something hefker, that they're so powerful, they make it public property, that if a stranger comes and takes some of the fruit, he doesn't even have to give anything to the Levi. But I'm she puturim and a meisers. How do you know it will remain potter for mices? You have it from a brisa. The brisa said that bezdin do not make leap years. They don't make 13 months in Shemitah and Motzoi Shvias. And but if they the Evid made a Iberyar, if they increased the month of Shemitah by an extra month, they needed to make an Adar Sheni, Harei Zumu Uberes. That makes it a leap year, and fine. So they're basically adding a Shemitah year, a year of Hefker, a year when everybody could walk into anybody's field and be potter for mices. Don't you see that when Bezdin adds on an extra month, they're adding it for anybody to making it Hefker. They're making a person's field hefker, and they're saying at the same time that whoever takes from that field would be potter from giving maestros. So we see Bezdin has such a power to make somebody's field hefker, and not only that, the strangers that come in don't have to give maestros. Says the Gemara, at kedoin shavi'is. I understand Shemitah, that why Bezdin, when we don't want Bezdin to make a leap year, because it's difficult enough as it is. You're not working a whole year. Now Bezdin's going to say it's a 13-month year. So we don't want Bezdin to make a leap year out of Shemitah. But the Gemara says, why can't you make the 8th year a leap year? What's wrong? The first year of the next cycle, the first year of the next seven Shemitah cycle, why can't they make that an Adar Sheni? Why can't they make that year a 13-month year? So Amar Rabbi Bam, that they don't want the Isser Chodesh, because again, people it's still eating the food from the 6th year. The whole 7th year they didn't plant. The 8th year they're not eating any food until from the new crop until ear time. And so if you push it off until Nisan time, until Pesach time, so if you push it off another year, people are going to be tempted to eat the new crop because it's taking so long until they could finally eat. So we don't extend the 8th year, the first year of the next cycle. That was until Rebbe did not permit to bringing imported vegetables. There was a gzeira not to bring imported vegetables into Eretz Yisrael. Had to do with Tumah. Aval Meshihita, Rabbeinu HaKadosh said, okay, we're allowing imports. So now there's a whole import coming into Eretz Yisrael. So nobody's missing food in Eretz Yisrael on Shemitah or the 8th year. That means that Shemitah you could make a leap year, and also the 8th year you could also make a leap year. Because since you're importing food, nobody's in such a desperation that they have to break the laws if you extend the years. Tano Ema Abram, Amar said, Hadodat Amra Buri Shoina, when the Beis Hamikdash was around, Shoya Shonim Kitkunam, when the years were normal, then we said don't make leap years in Shemitah and on the 8th year. Aval Achshav, Shein Hashem Kitiknon, he Shvias, he Shar Shnei Shvuos. So the Gemara concludes that on Shemitah and on other years, and on the 8th year, you could make a leap year. But that was just all this, what I'm talking about right now is a side point. The whole point is that if Bezdin did happen to make a leap year on Shemitah, from here is a proof that Hefker Bezdin Hefker, and if they make it Hefker, you're potter from Isis. So the Gemara says, one second. Amar Rab Avun in Minhada le Achshma Mino Klum Shamar as Chodesh Havet. That's not such a proof that Bezdin has that power, because the Torah gave Bezdin the power to make leap years. If the Torah gives you the power to make leap years, certainly they gave Bezdin the power that to make something hefker and to make it potter for meisrus. But what we want to know is when Bezdin comes up with their own fines, with their own penalties, how do you know that Bezdin has the power to make it hefker and also be potter for maestris? Because there the Torah gave a special heter to the Bezdin to keep the month of Nisan in the springtime. So so we have another place in Masechta Zroim. The Mishnah says in Masechta Zroim like this. Very interesting case. You know that when you cutting your field, if you drop one stalk, one or two stalks, that you have to leave it there. That's called leket. And the ani, the poor person, comes to collect it. That's his. So a guy cut his field and dropped a couple of stalks all around, and he's very nervous. Now the aniyim are going to come and take some of that stalk. So he takes his own personal stuff and puts it on top of the leket, of the leket, that what fell from his hands, which really belongs to the ani. In other words, he's trying to block the ani, the poor people, from seeing it. So Godish, if you have a personal pile of your own property, of your own produce, the ani did not yet come to take the leket from underneath it, and you purposely dump your items on top of that so that the ani will not take the leket. Kolan is a penalty. Whatever of yours becomes the aniyim also. Bezdin says that's a sneaky move that you did. You're trying to block the poor person from getting his leket. Therefore, anything that you own becomes the anis. And now, when it becomes the aniyim, it's if it belongs only to the aniyim, then it's potter from Isis, like a regular leket. The Omer Rab Ami said. Now we go to Omer Sheni. B'Shem Rav Shimon B'Galakal to B'Shamehi. That maybe only works according to Beis Shammai, because Beis Shammai says that even hefker is a possibility to call something hefker, even only if a group of even if only a one subset of people could use it. Here, it's not really hefker because rich people can't take it. It's only hefker so that a poor person can take that whole pile, and yet that only works according to Beis Shammai. The Beis Hillel holds aniyim oichlun masrim. This is not really called hefker because it was only given to poor people, not to everybody. So therefore, the poor people will have to eat it and take maasros, because that's his opinion. Amalei Rabbi Yossi says not true. Shomani shu potter mimaisa debeakol. I heard that it's potter. Everybody, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would agree that it's potter for maisa. In other words, Bezdin made it hefker for everybody, but then said only the ani should take it. And therefore, they made it hefker for everybody. It becomes potter for maasros. Mishum knasa, that's the power of the penalty of Hegdish, of Bezdin. So what you see, what we just discussed is how Bezdin has such an awesome power to penalize someone. They could confiscate his field, and not only that, they can say that whoever's going to walk into his field and take his produce will not even have to give off maasros. New Mishnah. Chamisha Asaboy, on the 15th day of Adar, Shulchanis HaYoshim Abedina. All around the country, all around Israel, they had people set up, bankers set up to collect the machzis shekel, and then they would collect it and bring it to Jerusalem. The Esr Mechamisha, but by the 25th of Adar, Yashvu B'Migdash, the bankers were set up in Jerusalem, because even Jerusalem people have to contribute the machzis shekel. Just because you live near Jerusalem and near the Beis HaMikdash doesn't mean you're exempt. So they were basically bankers all around where you can make your deposit for your machzis shekel. And once the bankers already was sitting in the Beis HaMikdash around Jerusalem, his chilul mashke. If a guy did not bring his machzis shekel, they wrote your name down and they came to your house and took collateral. They would walk into your house and take your iPhone or something like that till you give your machzis shekel. Bezdin had that power. Esmi Mamashkin, who would they take collateral from? If a person didn't bring his machzis shekel during the month of Adar, they would take collateral from him. They would walk into his house. Leviim, Yisraelim, Begerim, Vavalim, B'Shkorarim. Anybody who's mechayiv to bring the machzis shekel. Yisraelim, Leviim have to bring machzis shekel. And Gerim, converts, and Avodim, B'Shkorarim, freed slaves who are like converts, but Avloi, Noshim, Vavodim, Uktanim. A woman or slaves, goyish slaves, or a cotton, they're potter from machzas shekel. Of course, they would not take a collateral from them. If you have a cotton that the father started giving machzas shekel on his behalf, shubein poisik, he would never stop. So once again, if you have a habit of giving machzas shekel on your small child, even though you're not mechuyev to, once you started, you cannot stop. It becomes every year you have to do so. Now, the Mishnah says, the Mishnah is of the opinion that a kohen really is supposed to contribute machzas shekel. That is the opinion of the Tanakama. But they don't take, if the kohen did not bring his machzas shekel, you don't take collateral from the kohen. Because here's a person that works in the Beis Hamikdash. If he didn't get a chance to do it, we're nice about it, and we don't take a mashkin from him, and we just loan him the money, and when he gives it, we pay it back. But the truth is that he has to get his machzas shekel in time before Nisan, before the month of Nisan. Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda said, "Hey, Ben Bukhri b'yavna." This Ben Bukhri is of the opinion that a kohen is not supposed to give machzas shekel. A kohen has an exemption. But kol kohen sheshoikel, but if he does give the machzas shekel, he does nothing wrong. It's just that Ben Bukhri says that he doesn't have the obligation to do so. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told him, not true. Amro loiki, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai loiki, it's not so. El kol kohen she'einu shoikel choyte. If the kohen does not give his machzas shekel, he's doing a big avera. Now, why would the Kahanim saying to themselves they don't have to contribute? Because really, when a kohen brings a mincha, his own personal mincha, it has to be totally burned up on the mizbeach. If a kohen brought a mincha, it's totally, there's nobody can eat from it. It has to be burned up on the mizbeach. But we find the machzas shekel was used to buy karbanos tzibor, and part of the minchas tzibor are a couple of menachos that actually had the kohanim eating it. So if the kohanim are contributing it, then these minchas really should be burnt up. And since the Torah says they're not burned up, it must be that kohanim are not obligated to contribute. So that's why. All any mincha that belongs to a kohen, nobody is allowed to eat it. Now, if they're going to contribute, since the oimer and the shtei lechem and the lechem aponim, which all types of public minchas and food, that really everybody contributed it, and the kahanim were eating from it, how could they be eaten? If I own it, if I'm a kohen and I own it, I'm not supposed to eat it. And yet the Torah says I'm supposed to eat it. It must be I don't have to contribute to the machzas shekel. That was the opinion of why Kahanim felt they don't have to contribute from the machzas shekel. But the truth is they do have to contribute, because once they contribute, it's the oimer and shtei lechem are not personally the kohens. They're the tziburs, and the tziburs menachos, the tziburs thing, do have parts that are eaten by the Kahanim. One more piece of Gemara and then we'll stop. The Mishnah said, "Ein mashkinin es tanim." We don't give the cotton. We don't take collateral from a cotton. Now, ha litvaya betoivim, but you can ask a cotton to give to the machzas shekel. Now, you're going to right away tell him, what do you mean? A kid who's 7 years old, you're going to ask him to give the machzas shekel? We're going to qualify that. If he brought 2 years, if he's over bar mitzvah, there's an obligation for him to bechanech himself in machzas shekel. But if he doesn't want to do it, we don't take a mashkin from him. Because really, the machzas shekel is only for people who are 20 years older, 20 years or above. And just from 13, he's not really obligated. But if a cotton didn't bring even 2 years, he's not bar mitzvah, loy bada, then it's not correct. We don't ask him for the machzas shekel. But even after bar mitzvah, and mashkin we don't take from him, even though he didn't bring 2 sa'aras. Okay, I didn't get a chance to finish. Oh, maybe we could finish just to the. Let's do one more, another line to the Mishnah. That's it. They said they don't, Kahanim, you don't take a mashkin because it's not respectful for a kohen. You take a collateral from him if he didn't contribute yet. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Abrechia, time of Rabbi Yochanan Zakane. How do you know? Where did Rabbi Yochanan Zakane know that a kohen is obligated in machzas shekel? Because it says Zeh Yitnu. And the gematria of Zeh is Shnei Masah Shvatnim. Every shevet had an obligation to give. According to Rabbi Yochanan Zakane, and the Chachamim, everybody holds that a kohen is obligated to give machzas shekel. But again, there's the sheet of Rabrechia, of Ben Bukhri, who said Kehanim are not obligated to give. Rab Tavi b'shem Rab Nuna came Shivin Chacham Rabbi Yehuda Chatas Yehuda Mesa Ein Chatas Tziba Mesa Minchas Hayaga Kreva Kol and Minchas Tziba Kreva Kol. They told Rabbi Yehuda, who held like Ben Bukhri, that listen, why do you say that they could, if the Eved, why do you say an opinion that they're not allowed to give, they don't have to give machzas shekel, but if the Eved they give it, it's okay, we'll take it from them. Why? If I carried it should be an Aveira, according to your theory, they should not be allowed to give, because once they give, it becomes the property of the kohen, and you're supposed to burn the minchas tzibur. The kashya meshibel adam shein of shein moida, the tan shein chatas tzibur made Rabbi Yehuda oimet tamuz. Just like this part of this doesn't make sense. You say chatas yochid gets killed, but chatas tzibur mesa. So even Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree to that. But the bottom line question is, where we're holding right now is, how did Rabbi Yehuda allow that even though you hold a kohen is not supposed to give, if he does give, it's also okay. Once the kohen gives it over to the tzibur, it's not the kohen's anymore. It belongs to the tzibur. So therefore, he's allowed to eat the mincha that belongs to the tzibur. Once it's given over to the tzibur, it is like the nidvat tzibur. So the chacham will tell him, then even lechatchila they should be allowed to give to the machzas shekel, because once they donate it, it becomes the tzibur. It's not the kohen's anymore, and that's the opinion. So what you remember here is Rabbi Yochanan and the chachamim hold that kahanim are obligated to give, and Ben Bukhri and Rabbi Yehuda hold that kohen are not obligated, but if they do give, they don't do it. It's not an aveira. And one last thing, Ksiv, it says in the pasuk, Kol oiver al pekudim, Rabbi Yehuda ben Chemya says, it says anybody who's counted has to give the machzas shekel. Chad Oma called over b'yamayit. Anybody who went through the Yam Suf, that means the whole Jewish people, is obligated to give the machzas shekel. The Charana Oma, but the other interpreted it, called oiver al pekudim, called the over al pukdayit. Those that were obligated, those that were counted amongst Klal Yisrael, they had to give the machzas shekel. But if you learn Chumash well, the Levium were not counted. They were counted separately. Moshe counted 11 shvatim and then counted the Levium as a separate counting. So they were not included into the machzas shekel. So that's what he says. Man the Omer called the Ava b'yama yite, that the kol oiva pekuda means anybody who passed through the Yamsus had to give machzas shekel. Messiah Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. He holds like Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai that kohen are obligated to give machzas shekel. Man the Omer called the Ava pekuda yite, that the Torah only said kol oiva ala pekuda means only those that were counted by Moshe Rabbeinu, 11 shvatim have to give the machzas shekel. But Shevet Levi was not counted by Moshe Rabbeinu directly. He had to go to their house to count them. They're not included in machzas shekel. He will hold Messiah Ben Bukhri. He will hold like Ben Bukhri that kahanim are not obligated to give the machzas shekel. Wow, these dafim are long, but Baruch Hashem, we finished to the bottom of the page.
Shkoch.
Okay.
Chag kosher v'sameach.
Chag kosher v'sameach, everybody, and lechter g'yontiv.
Chag kosher v'sameach.
Enjoy your family, and we'll get back in Mitzvah Shem a couple of days after Yontif, Mitzvah Shem.
Very good.
B'shah tov.
B'shah tov.
Okay.